Hello and welcome to the Queen Bee podcast, where the stories of regional women come alive, resonate and inspire. I'm your host, Tanya Rutherford, and together with a passionate team of women, we've painted this landscape for you. In truth, this podcast is about gathering the stories of women who live in regional and remote Australia to bridge those gaps, to create communities, and of course, to tell the richness in their journeys. Now, if anything does come up for you today, please be kind to yourself. You can share it with us, whether that's through our socials, our Queen Bee community, or you can send us a DM. Hello and welcome to this week's episode of the Queen Bee podcast. Joining me today is Heidi Gray, and Heidi is a dynamic, vivacious, funny and youthful woman. She's grown up in rural Australia, which are on the border of New South Wales and Queensland, and she not only has country at her heart, but is also career-oriented and passionate about wellbeing. Welcome, Heidi.
Thank you, Tanya. It's a pleasure to be here.
So tell us a bit about your journey. Growing up in the country, what were your most memorable experiences, I guess?
Yeah, so as you say, growing up in the country, my first memories have really always just been on the farm. My dad is an ag pilot, so we sort of spent a lot of time initially, I guess, moving around, following his work. And my mum grew up on a property out west of Wee Waa, Narrabri, so right out in the sticks. A lot of memories just going up to my grandparents' place and just that, I guess, that wide open space and not really understanding what a neighbour was and that sort of thing. And then when I was about 8 years old, my parents moved to a property in near Warialda in Inverell in New South Wales. And if they're still there now, so we've sort of had 20 years on that property, and just sort of my brother and I spent a lot of our, I guess, childhood years outside and, trying not to break too many bones and that sort of thing. And it's really given us both this really lovely, I guess, attachment to animals and to, nature. And, just instead of on the weekends being too fussed about staying inside, like we spent a lot of time sort of out like down at the creek and having barbies and just kicking the footy around. And it was just such a lovely way to grow up. And we're always a little bit just jealous of our friends who got to hang out after school or whatever it might be, but we got to really have that, I guess, connection with the land and with our animals. And bringing our friends out there to sort of have that same sort of experience was really cool. So I'm very grateful to that. I went away to boarding school when I was 14, so went across the border to Queensland in Toowoomba, and spent a few years there. And really, like, I was never great at school. Like I loved primary school because you just sort of kick around with your friends, but I felt like in high school everything got a bit serious and it just wasn't really my cup of tea. But I got made some beautiful friends through boarding school. And I think, now you just have mates all over the place just because everyone's obviously from different corners of the state and country. So yeah, it was a really cool experience. And it's definitely got me to where I am now.
And so talking about where you are now, what are the kind of things that you're working on at the moment?
Yeah, so I was an travel consultant, so I did that for about 6 years. And then in 2018, obviously New South Wales, Queensland, most of Australia were going through a really intense drought, and I sort of took a break from my travel lifestyle. And thank goodness, because COVID would have kicked me right out of it anyway. And just, I guess, through that experience, it got me thinking, just seeing the effects that drought was having on my family and the community. I decided to study counselling, and just from there then sort of did psych at uni. And I left school when I was 16, so I didn't really look at books until I was 24. So that was a bit of an experience to kind of go into that study space. at an older age, but I'm so glad I did it that way, because I really did give it my all when it was something I was interested in. And yeah, through that, I guess the last couple of years have been working as a counsellor, predominantly in rural areas. So working with farmers and rural communities in terms of, disaster management and how that kind of looks like in, I guess, a wellbeing space. I'm doing a similar sort of role now up in Queensland. So I've moved up to the Sunshine Coast with my partner the start of this year, and I'm sort of able to do, I guess, that similar kind of role for an organisation up here, working with small business owners and primary producers, just in that wellbeing space. And then I also have sort of my own private counselling business where I can work with sort of people from all ages and in different backgrounds in that really low intervention, person-centered approach. So yeah, it's a really great little I guess niche, I think, working in that disaster recovery space in terms of being a counsellor and being an advocate for rural communities and for farmers and for small business owners that might not have this same access to resources that we get in those more urban areas. So yeah, my life is it's a really good balance at the moment, I guess, of living where we live here on the coast, but also being able to sort of still have that connection to those smaller towns and those rural communities that, I do miss my home in New South Wales. But I guess it is really just about chasing those opportunities and being able to get as much experience as you can. We don't have kids at the moment, or have no real, I guess, ties anywhere. So we're really just taking that ability to just sort of float around as much as we can and kind of, I guess, be like two big sponges and sort of take in and sort of keep bettering ourselves, which is lots of fun.
And so where would you like to go with all this?
Where would I like to go? Well, I'm doing my fourth year psych at uni at the moment, which is a research degree. And it's funny, when I did my counselling diploma, counselling is very practical, and then you sort of do your psychology undergrad at uni, and it's not practical in terms of skills or anything. It is very science-based. It is, you're obviously learning all about like the biology and, different, I guess, aspects of what health is, and that real biopsychosocial model, which is a fantastic thing that we are really trying to implement, rather than just that biomedical model. We'll just talk about the symptoms and where they come from and not really looking at it holistically. So it was funny to do that counselling and really love that, and then sort of do the psychology and sort of see how different they are. But through my undergrad, I definitely found a little bit of a love for that research side of things. And so I'm sort of kind of making my way through this final degree at the moment. And we have a task of doing a thesis and really, developing those skills in the research world. And I think it's definitely somewhere for me as someone who's an advocate for rural communities and for, people that may not have same access to, as I said before, resources and that sort of thing, being able to get into that research field, and through the connections that I already have in terms of people I've worked with before in health and the wellbeing space, just being able to, I guess, find gaps in the literature or gaps in the research and be able to sort of put my energy into that. And balancing that with, I love the practicality, as I said, of counselling, but I'm really excited by the research opportunities that we have in this space. So to answer your question, Tanya, I'm probably got a little bit on the next couple of years, but as I said, my partner and I are just really enjoying this time that we've got together, and being able to sort of move around and take on these new opportunities. And if I can kind of manage my studies and my work and my work-life balance as well, I'll be really happy. And just sort of, as I said, sort of focusing on maybe that longer term of getting into more of that research side of things as like a career goal, but always really being able to carry that those counseling skills that I've built, whether it's through private practice or working. And yeah, it's definitely different to the travel consulting life I was doing
Yep.
4 or 5 or 6 years ago. But yeah, I'm really loving it. It's a really great space to work in, and you just meet the most amazing, resilient people.
And it kind of feels like it's a really good blend, like, you know, between your passion for like, country communities, that sort of counseling, so you're aware of the individual, and then that psychology, bringing those together kind of offset some of the disadvantages of having them just on their own. So being able to bring that together, I can really see that you have great potential to, add to that research field in a real practical sense, and like even interpreting a lot of the research for people to understand what it means for them. Yeah, awesome.
Yeah, definitely. And I like what you're saying there too. It's, when you work with, um, I'm not generalizing farmers at all, but like if you sort of you come into a counseling space with someone from, with that real practical mindset. And if you're trying to talk about, coping strategies or identifying stresses and what that might look like for them, if you can't sort of come into that conversation from a practical point of view, or, have that sort of evidence-based approach in terms of what you're kind of the work you're trying to do together, they'll just sort of look at it and go, oh, it's either a waste of their time, or it's a bit woo woo in terms of just like it's just words. And so you're just being able to have that, break things down and look at it a little bit more mechanically or whatever it might be. It just really builds that trust in what counseling is and what that service is, because there has always been this stigma, and it is definitely still around, but you just people asking for support and people sort of accessing counseling services, and I think it's definitely breaking down. And I do believe that, after the drought and the bushfires and, COVID-19 and all of the horrible sort of events that have happened over the last 5 years, I think one of the best things to come out of it is the fact that people are becoming more like open to the idea of asking for help. And I think, there's been a lot of different services and supports that have sort of popped up since. And I think our job as being, working in this space is just really planting the seeds. And you don't necessarily have to approach someone at an expo, or, at I don't know, like a community barbecue where there might be service providers or something like that. But just sort of being able to sort of, put those, as I said, plant those seeds. And so people kind of know that you're there. And when they feel comfortable to reach out to you or approach you, then it's in their time, and it's going to be a lot more effective than you trying to push something on them and tell them that they need to talk. Or yeah, so it's just respecting that space. And yeah, it's as I said before, it's exciting. It's an exciting place to work, but you always have to respect your clients and what they're going to be comfortable with.
And I think also coming to the table with that understanding of those challenges that they're going through, like from your own lived experience and the lived experience of your family, I would imagine gives a very different, I guess it gives them more permission, because they can see that you get what they're talking about. It's not just a, oh yes, we know it's hard, that kind of thing, but an actual, yeah, my folks have been through that. I've been helping out on the farm, and they're going, oh, she gets it, she gets me. And I can see how that would open up a lot more conversations because you've had that experience, than someone who might be coming in from the city and just going, oh yes, I'm the counsellor and I'm here to help and save everyone. Which sounds terrible. I should stop saying things like that, because I sound like such a bitch. But sometimes that's how things can come across when we don't have that lived experience. And I know from when I've worked in the university sector is there can be in those kind of fields a lot of, I want to go out and save someone. And having a different approach is really important, I think.
Definitely. And I think we all this is why, like, as I said, I left school when I was in grade 10. I didn't like school. It didn't work for me. And then sort of having, going and doing what I wanted to do for a few years in terms of like doing that. And I was really lucky to get that opportunity to work and travel and to do that. But, you do sort of in a roundabout way find your, I guess, not to sound too la-di-da, but like you find your calling and you find, what you want to do, and whether if that's because of life experience or if that's because of something that you've always wanted to do, since you're a child. My dad's known he's wanted to be a pilot since he was 4, whereas I still didn't know what I wanted to do when I was 24. So I think it is just also, based on the person and the situation of their life. But I think too, like for me, like, like finding counseling as a space that I wanted to work as, but then, that area that I felt comfortable, because obviously, as a counselor or working in this space, I get a lot of imposter syndrome, and it's just because you're working with people who are vulnerable and you're really holding these conversations, and it can be very heavy at times. But there is like that, when you have got that level of self-disclosure, that is, can create such a bit more of safety in terms of like their willingness to share. I am very lucky in terms of that, my self-disclosure being a rural person and why I got into counseling, it does sort of give that level of safety to clients. And as you say before, they are a lot more forthcoming with what they'll tell you, because they know that they can kind of explain something farm related or, related to the industry that they're in, and it's not necessarily going to go over my head. And not that it's my job to be there as someone who understands farming, but it is just a nice thing to, I guess, add to it. And it's the same as, you're working with women, or I myself, I've got ADHD, so like when I work with clients who have got ADHD, it's like that's that same level of like self-disclosure. And I think you do notice when you work with clients and there is no similarities between your two lives, it is just really coming back to that, like, you're a counselor, these are the counseling skills, this is what your job is to be here today. You don't have to be, there's no level of self-disclosure there. But you definitely find your niche, and I'm sure you'd agree, like as you sort of go through life, you find areas that you can relate to and you feel like you're doing your best work. And I think if I can kind of continue to identify what they are and be able to put my energy into those areas of clients or career or whatever it is, I think that's where you're going to get the most enjoyment and be able to really like feel like you're doing very important work with people.
So coming into that ADHD side of things, is that something you've always known you have, or is that more of something you've learnt as you've become an adult, essentially?
It's funny because like when I was in primary school, I was always very bright. I loved school. I loved learning, and there was no signs or anything like that. And then pretty much, went to high school, did a year at high school, didn't necessarily enjoy that transition. And really, I guess I went through a lot of hormonal changes as well, coming into being a teenager. Going from really being like this kind of tomboy my whole life, and then all of a sudden like getting your period and getting boobs, and I was just so confused. But there was definitely something that switched for me when I was 13, and I just really lost a lot of drive and interest. And it was a very strange thing for me to kind of articulate, and I didn't really know how to talk to my parents about it. And anyway, and then I was lucky enough to go to boarding school when I was in grade 8, and did that for a few years. But just really was unable to kind of find that like love for learning and school. And I really did kind of just spend a few years just hanging out with new mates, and being in Toowoomba, which was a lot bigger and a lot more happening than my hometown. But yeah, it wasn't until I was 26, I actually met a girl, and she had ADHD. And obviously, when you're a kid, you're like the kids that had ADHD in my class were boys, and they were hyperactive, and it's that whole generalized stereotypical ADHD when you're a kid. And then I met a girl, and she told me that she just struggled with motivation and organization and that sort of thing, and sort of a massive oversharer, and just all of these things that I was like, oh my gosh, that's me.
And then that's usually how we find things, isn't it? It's like, it's like a mirror held up, and you're like, oh, okay.
Yeah, once I met this girl, we sort of had those conversations, and then I started doing Dr. Google, and I was sort of in that space of being a counselor and that sort of thing by then anyway, so knew a few of the tools that were out there in terms of what assessment looks like. And it was probably about a 4-month process, and then ended up getting my diagnosis, and was just super, I guess, relieved to find out that it was something that had like an explanation in a way. And it was probably I never really thought about it. I think I just always thought I obviously there was just something that happened when I was like in grade 7 for me to just not really have that a lot of ambition, and it was very disheartening, but it was just something that I accepted. But to then sort of have that go through that process, and then now be able to kind of talk with other people about it. And a lot of the conversations I have with people is like, oh, how can I change this, or how can I I want to be able to not I don't want to forget everything, or I don't like this about myself. And a big thing that I guess talk about and just kind of explore with clients, and then just people in general, is it is something that you really do have to accept about yourself. And instead of trying to change the way that you behave or change things about your processes, it's just really about educating yourself and finding the strengths that come with it. Because if you spend your whole day sort of thinking, oh, how do I stop having ADHD, or how do I deal with these symptoms, it's just such a frustrating process. But if you can really accept them, that's sort of the first step to being able to find ways to accommodate them. And if I'm going somewhere for the weekend now, put all my stuff at the front door the night before, otherwise I'll end up in Toowoomba for the weekend without a jacket in the middle of winter. So it's definitely a bit of a it's definitely a bit of a superpower, I think, and I do love that about it. But it's interesting. There's a lot of women that don't get diagnosed until they're older, and it's because the symptoms are very different to what we've always sort of known that they look like for kids. So it's caused me a lot of stress, but it's also it's been the backing of a lot of my successes as well.
And so if you could go back to that year 7 girl, that year 7 Heidi, and give her a message, what would it be? I guess what I would say is, just it's a hard question, because I've always said, I wouldn't go back and change, finding out about it earlier, and, finding out about it later in life, rather than earlier. And I guess for me, I'd probably say to her, just be more present, get to know yourself a little bit more, because, there might have been like opportunity to be aware of like processes and my thinking patterns. I think my biggest regret, I guess you could say, and I don't think I knew any better, but I just wasn't present enough with myself, and I didn't really take the time to understand myself. And I spent a lot of my teenage years and early 20s, just probably being very erratic and
doing a lot of partying and not really sort of thinking too much about me and my future and looking into the future at all. But really learning how to be present, whether it was through, when that drought was on and just really having to stop and sort of consider everything else around me and how everyone's sort of affected by this big event, and then getting into the counselling, like you really develop these skills of self-awareness. And I did a lot of getting to know myself sort of through those years of 24 and up. But yeah, I don't know what she'd say to me if I told her that, but when she's 13, but yeah, I think that's probably the advice I'd give her, just to, just sort of take some time to get to know yourself a bit more and just be present. And yeah, I'm a chronic reflector now, so I think, then the skills would have, like, there would have been some things there that hopefully the sort of thinking about it a little bit, might have worked back then, but they're definitely there now. So yeah, I guess, as I said, I'm long-winded answer of questions, but I think in a roundabout way, that's probably where I'd go with that advice.
And it's really hard, isn't it? Because we're all wiser in hindsight. And I think that for a certain period of our time when we're growing up is we're just not open to that kind of way of thinking. Like that's not how our brains work. So yeah. And I find it really interesting that you can kind of pinpoint that sense of when things almost like triggered that change, like that transition, and that, I imagine, stress period of moving from what was familiar and fun into something that was very different.
Most teenagers can relate, but just, I guess, that change in relationship I might have had with my family members as well, for everything to sort of feel super innocent. And then, you do have those years where you just, like, you can't have those same conversations with your parents or, your siblings or whatever it is, because you are going through all these internal changes yourself. And there's definitely a level of feeling isolated. And I've always sort of known that's definitely when it's happened. And I think too, like, my primary school was just probably some of the best years of my life. Like the teachers and the culture there was just, it was just such a accommodating place to be. And then that shift to go to high school where it didn't have that same feel. It's just, didn't feel like a transition. And there was just so many things that kind of happened. And that whole, I guess, the idea of going from being 12 years old to being a teenager, and you don't really think about it all. But yeah, I definitely wouldn't change a thing. Like, as I said earlier, like, being able to sort of have a break from school. And, I always said that school wasn't my thing when I was a teenager, but like, I do love studying now. I love, like, what I've decided to study, and it's just so much more interesting and easy to do when it's something that you're passionate about. And whether that's because I've had the life experience or if I've found something that it works for me. I'm definitely very grateful for that, because I know that if I did stick it out at school and I did go to uni straight after, like, I probably would be one of those people who have done 3 or 4 half degrees by now and still haven't found what I wanted to do. I feel like I'm really lucky in that sense, and it just shows that you can do things the unconventional way, and it can work out the right way for you.
Yeah. And so while you're here, is there anything else you might like to share with the audience?
I guess a big thing, as women and, as men as well, and any gender really, like, the older we get, the more, like, roles we are playing in our own life, and then, the roles that we're playing in other people's lives as well. And I think just really being able to kind of take care of ourselves and to recognize that, and to create spaces, whether it's, with friends or family, or, whether it's with a support person, to have those opportunities to sort of reflect on where we're at and what our responsibilities are. And, 'cause, you can kind of go through life and you can you can really just sort of keep your head above water and without sort of acknowledging how much, how much you are doing and, the impact that you're having on your own life and other people's life around you. So, just taking that time to really be acknowledged, like acknowledge yourselves and to be aware of, the others around you and to check in with your friends and family, because it's just, does feel like a little bit of a level of disconnection, since COVID potentially, whether that's been because we've had to isolate or had to spend a lot more time on technology. But there really is nothing better than sort of getting with people that you care about and just sort of, having a bit of a chat or a laugh and trying to work that, parallel line of looking after yourself and everything else kind of working, because you can't expect life to be going well or being able to sort of look after other people if you're not looking after yourself. So I guess that's a big thing. And that's probably all the advice I have, Tanya.
Well, and great advice it is too. And I think it's so easy to forget to look after ourselves first. And therefore so much easier to get run down trying to look after everyone else. So thank you for joining us for today's episode. We've been yarning with Heidi Gray. Heidi is a wellness coach. She's also doing work with crisis management. That's right, isn't it? Crisis management? Hang on.
Sorry. So business, I'm business wellness coach at the moment, up in Gympie. So working with small business owners and farmers who have been affected by natural disaster, but also just working with them in terms of, creating a better space for their well-being and just helping them to sort of move forward with all of the different things that we get thrown at each year. So
awesome. I thought I was misreading it because you're in Gympie and living in the Sunshine Coast, so I got myself confused.
Yeah.
So you're living in the Sunshine Coast with your partner and a puppy, I believe.
No, so it's just James and I would love to get a puppy, but we have a small apartment, so it's just not something that we've committed to yet. But I do have a 13-year-old Jack Russell Vardy who lives with my parents. He's a massive farm dog, so he would hate it at the coast. But massive, beautiful little Jack Russell. I think he would be so devastated if I got another dog, to be honest. But he's a only child for sure. Like, he just loves the attention, and he's great. But hopefully 2024, I'll get James to listen to this podcast, and if he can hear this bit at the end where I'm asking him to get me a puppy.
Awesome. So if you would like to come onto this podcast to request pets, please do get in contact. I have pet pigs at the moment, so as well as cats and dogs and everything else. But yes, so
awesome. I can hear your pet rooster out there.
Well, ducks, everyone likes to get in on the action here. I bribed the goats today, so they're not being too noisy. So awesome. Well, thank you so much, and definitely connect with Heidi and keep listening to the Queen Bee podcast. The Queen Bee podcast delves into the heart of regional women's experiences, their aspirations, challenges, and journeys. It's a platform that celebrates their individuality, their resilience, and their ambition. These tales of reinvention, adaptation, inspiration, and the power of connections.